Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more. My son was 13 when I made him start wearing a girdle. I had been building up to it for some time. In fact, it had been at the back of my mind ever since he had come to stay with me a year earlier. Daniel's moving in had come as a bit of a surprise, but when his mother had died in a car crash there was really no one else for him to live with. Things had been awkward at first, as I hadn't seen him since he was 5 and he didn't really remember me, but we had got to know each other pretty well over the months. Well enough, in fact, for me to finally feel comfortable about broaching the subject of cross-dressing. I had been wearing women's foundations full-time since my late teens. It was one of the reasons that my wife left me, and letting her have full custody of Daniel was one of the conditions I had to agree to in order to prevent her making this fact public. Since Daniel had moved in, I had given up on wearing bras and simply restricted myself to wearing a fairly discreet panty girdle that was barely noticeable under my trousers. So far he had never suspected, but I longed to be able to wear my other girdles and bras again. As I thought about how I could bring this about, it occurred to me that I had been roughly the same age as Daniel when I first tried on my mother's girdle. Perhaps the way to solve the problem was to introduce Daniel to the pleasures of wearing women's corsetry. I had no idea whether he had ever considered the idea, but it seemed worth a try. As the saying goes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. A few weeks before his birthday, I ordered him a couple of Playtex 18-hour long leg panty girdles from my usual mail order supplier. I intended him to wear a girdle to school when the new term started the following month, so I wanted something that would be firm yet not too obvious under his uniform. His birthday finally came around and, after he had opened the other presents I had given him, I handed him the parcel containing his special present. He tore off the wrapping paper along the top, grabbed the top of the first box, and finally pulled it free. His face was a picture as he stared at the model on the front of the box. He finally looked over to me and asked what he was meant to do with it. When I told him to take off his jeans and put it on, he started to smile as if it was all a joke. The grin soon faded from his face, though, when he realized I was serious. Over the next half hour, I told him the story of how I had started wearing women's underwear and the pleasure that was involved in it. I even took down my trousers to let him see my own panty girdle. He seemed to be in a state of shock, and I had to tell him several times to put on his new girdle before what I was saying sunk in. He then burst into tears. I have to admit, I was more than a little irritated with him. If my parents had allowed me to have my own girdle when I was his age, I would have been ecstatic. Tiring of his blubbing and pleading, I took the box out of his hand and pulled out the girdle. The sight of it made him even worse. He was in a blind panic as he finally realized that he really was going to have to put it on. I grabbed him by the shoulders, shook him like a rag doll and screamed at him to pull himself together. This was the first time he had ever seen me lose my temper, and he froze in terror. I decided to take advantage of this and grabbed his belt buckle. In a few seconds, his jeans were round his ankles. He was still standing like a statue, so I pushed him down on the sofa, pulled his jeans off and forced one foot, then the other, through the legs of the girdle. Sitting astride him, I pulled the girdle up and, after a little wrestling, got it properly on him. He lay there in stunned silence, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling with a look of idiotic disbelief on his face. As I pulled him back onto his feet, he looked down, saw himself in the girdle, and the waterworks started again. But I was determined that he would at least give his new way of life a try. I told him to pick up his jeans and put them back on. Annoyed as I was, I had a little difficulty keeping a straight face as I watched him struggle to bend over and get back into his jeans. Finally, he managed to get dressed. To my relief, you could hardly tell what he was wearing underneath. That meant he would be able to wear his girdle pretty much full time. He spent the rest of his birthday in front of the TV, sobbing occasionally. He knew better, though, than to ask me if he could take his girdle off. During the remainder of his school holiday, he wore a girdle every moment he was awake. He quickly learned to move around naturally while girdled, managing to walk, stand, and sit without revealing anything to those around him. Despite my encouragement, he refused to go out with friends and appeared embarrassed to meet them. I recalled my own discomfort when I first wore women's underwear in public, so I decided to give him time to adjust. He never complained about wearing it and even put it on in the mornings without needing reminders. The only time he resisted was when he realized I expected him to wear it to school. This led to a major outburst, and on the first day of term, I had to ensure he put it on before leaving the house. I warned him that it would leave marks, so I'd know if he took it off and only wore it before returning home. To my satisfaction, when I checked him later, it was clear he had worn it all day. When he mentioned that one of his teachers casually remarked he looked slimmer, I seized the opportunity. His shoulders visibly drooped as I pointed out that he couldn't stop wearing the girdle now without drawing attention. At that moment, it seemed he finally accepted that this was his new reality, and from then on, there were no more arguments. I returned to wearing a wider variety of corsetry and felt happier than ever. However, Daniel became increasingly quiet and withdrawn. Occasionally, I caught him staring at me sullenly as I moved around the house in my long-line bra, open girdle, and stockings during the warm summer days. I eventually realized what was bothering him. He had become so accustomed to this lifestyle that he was jealous of my more interesting underwear. That Christmas, I went all out. I bought him frilly panties, tights, stockings, a couple of Triumph long-line bras, and from America, a firm control custom-made long-leg panty girdle and a similarly firm 6-suspender high-waist Rogo open girdle. His astonishment was palpable. He turned pale when he saw the new underwear laid out on the bed, and I thought he might faint. A couple of tears slipped down his cheeks as I helped him into his open girdle and bra, but I hoped they were tears of joy. I stayed quiet, not wanting to embarrass him. Teenagers can be sensitive that way. I demonstrated how to attach stockings to his suspenders and explained that it was easier to connect them to the back suspenders when the girdle was only halfway up. I reminded him never to pull on a hook-side girdle as he did with his previous ones. It should always be unzipped and unhooked before putting it on or taking it off. After he was in his new girdle, I had him practice fastening and unfastening his bra behind his back. It took some time, especially since it was a long-line bra with many hooks, but he eventually got the hang of it. I had chosen the smallest cup size available, worried it might sag on him, but I was pleased to see that he filled it out a bit, not completely, but enough to have a slight, noticeable shape. I left him on his bed, facing away from me and staring blankly at the wall in his new foundations. I couldn't understand why he continued to pretend to hate it. I was sure he enjoyed the feel of the corsetry against his body and likely couldn't wait for me to leave so he could admire himself in the mirror, just like I used to at his age. Although Daniel had been wearing a girdle regularly for months, he never seemed to take pleasure in seeing himself in it while I was around. He would hastily pull on his jeans or trousers after putting it on, avoiding his reflection in the mirror until fully dressed. If I didn't know him well, I might think he was trying to ignore the girdle, despite the undeniable sensation against his skin. In truth, he probably feared losing face by admitting that I had been right all along, that he genuinely enjoyed wearing women's clothing and was embarrassed about the fuss he had made. Thus, he felt compelled to maintain the act of being the victim. Teenagers. Still, as I went downstairs, I felt proud of myself for giving him the opportunity to experience what I had longed for at his age. I could only imagine how he felt every morning, knowing he would be in a girdle until bedtime. Another 8 months have passed, and we're into another school holiday. Since Christmas, the routine has remained unchanged. On school days or when he goes out, he wears his panties, tights, and a panty girdle. At home, it's panties, an open girdle, stockings, and a bra. He socializes far less than he used to, and no friends come around anymore. Sometimes, I struggle to get a civil word out of him. He just sits in front of the TV, at least the underwear keeps him from slouching, plays on his computer, or mopes around in his room listening to music, if you can call it that. I suspect he genuinely enjoys the open girdle and bra combo but knows he can't wear it outside. I'm glad he's finally appreciating it, though it would be nice for him to express some gratitude for everything I've done for him this past year. I still catch him glaring at me when he thinks I'm not looking, and I have no idea what I've done to upset him. Honestly, there are times when I think I'll never understand him. Regardless, his birthday is coming up just before the weekend, and I have a surprise planned that should lift his spirits. Given his smaller build, I think he could pull off full cross-dressing. At no point in my life could I have pretended to be female, but I believe Daniel can manage it. I just received his gifts through mail order, a couple of petticoats, several dresses, blouses, and skirts. I even got him shoes. Starting the day after his birthday, we're going on holiday for 2 weeks, and I've booked it for myself and my daughter, Davina. Not only will he have the chance to dress completely as a girl for a fortnight, but he'll also get the thrill of doing it in public. Plus, he can wear his favorite girdle and bra full time. This is going to be a birthday to remember, and I can't wait to see the look on his face. I tried to feign illness, but he didn't buy it. He just tossed a girdle at me and told me to hurry up. Not just any girdle, my girdle. Even after a year, I still felt a knot in my stomach each morning at the thought of spending another day in women's underwear. It wouldn't be so bad if it were just panties and tights. At least I could try to forget I was wearing them. Why did it have to be girdles and bras? Today was shaping up to be the worst day ever. Surely, he couldn't be serious about this. I brushed my teeth, showered, and returned to the bedroom to get dressed. First, I put on my frilly panties, followed by the lace-top stockings he preferred. I grabbed the Roggo open girdle, stepped into it, and pulled it up most of the way before fastening the back suspenders. I then pulled it up fully to secure the front and side suspenders, just as he had shown me. Now came the difficult part. I sucked in my stomach, hooked the side clasps, and zipped myself into it for another day of mental and physical discomfort. I winced as I relaxed my stomach muscles and felt the grip tighten. I hated the feeling of that thing on me. I quickly put on the longline bra and fastened it. Practice makes perfect. I could probably teach the other guys at school how to handle their girlfriends' bras. I'd make a fortune. Not that I have much interaction with them anymore. How could I face them and pretend everything was normal when every movement reminded me of the panty girdle under my school uniform? As I searched for the rest of my clothes, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and quickly looked away. I couldn't stand to see myself in this outfit, I just couldn't, especially with mirrors everywhere in the house. My bottom lip trembled as I noticed my new clothes laid out before me, my birthday presents. Trying to hold back tears that would only lead to more tears, I picked up my petticoat and slipped it on. I added the blouse, followed by the form-fitting black knee-length skirt, wiggling it over my smooth, firmly girdled hips while gripping the hem of my petticoat between my thighs to prevent it from riding up. After tucking in the blouse and fastening the skirt, I sat down to put on my shoes. The hem of the petticoat peeked out from under my skirt as I bent over, and I felt my lip quiver again. I quickly slipped on my shoes and, struggling to regain my composure, headed downstairs while giving the mirror a wide berth. He couldn't be serious, could he? As I walked into the kitchen, he stopped to look at me, told me how beautiful I looked, and insisted I stand in front of the mirror to see for myself. Then he began to lift my skirt inch by inch, revealing the lacy hem of the petticoat, then the stocking tops, the suspenders, and finally the girdle in all its dreaded glory. He told me how fortunate I was to dress this way and how wonderful the next 2 weeks would be. Faced with the appalling image in the mirror, I had never felt so disgusted with him and ashamed of myself. Once he let me go, I couldn't get away from that mirror fast enough. Throughout breakfast, I waited for him to say he'd changed his mind, but after clearing up, he handed me the car key, opened the front door, and told me to wait in the car while he got the luggage. Oh no. Oh God, no. He really meant it. I was going to have to go outside dressed as a girl. I had dreaded this all night, terrified at the thought, and now it was happening for real. My heart raced in my chest, and my mouth went dry as I shuffled toward the open door. When I realized that anyone passing by could look in and see me, I pressed myself against the wall, struggling to catch my breath.
I noticed him standing there, trying not to laugh. He was sending his son out in girls' clothes, and he thought it was hilarious. He waved at me to go on, so I took a deep breath, peeked out to check that no one was around, and then rushed out to the car. I was outside. I was outside. Oh Jesus, I was outside. It was a bright, sunny summer morning, and there I was, standing in the middle of our driveway where anyone could see me, wearing a blouse and a skirt. I tried to open the car door quickly, but my hands shook so much that I dropped the key. I bent over to pick it up, but the more I hurried, the more it seemed to sink into the gravel. The back of my skirt rode up, and I felt a breeze on the bare skin between my stockings and girdle, which was painfully digging in as I bent. Looking down, I realized just how clearly my bra and petticoat showed through the white blouse. I froze in horror as I heard the Williamsons' front door unlock. Someone was coming out to see me. Tears streamed down my face, but I finally managed to grab the car keys and rushed through the passenger door just as Mrs. Williamson appeared, slamming it shut behind me. I shrank into the seat, hoping she wouldn't notice the outline of my bra. At least the blouse was fairly plain and didn't look too feminine from a distance. She waved and said something about hoping I'd have a nice holiday. I forced a smile, waved back, and nearly collapsed with relief as she picked up 2 milk bottles and went back into the house. When he finally packed the car, he got in, glanced down at my skirt, which had hiked up during my rush, pulled it down over the revealed stocking top, and with a wink, told me I needed to be more ladylike. He thinks I enjoy this. He really believes I enjoy wearing women's clothes. What is wrong with him? I spent the next few hours dreading the moment I would have to get out of the car in public. That moment finally arrived as he exited the motorway and pulled into a service station parking lot. He parked as close to the entrance as possible, turned off the engine, and got out. When I didn't move to follow him, he came around to my side and opened the passenger door. Despite knowing better, I begged one last time, but he simply reached in, grabbed my elbow, and pulled me out of the car. While he locked up and checked the doors and windows, I stood there, wide-eyed with terror, frantically scanning for anyone who might be watching me, tugging at the hem of my skirt as if that would make any difference. He took my arm again, and we began walking toward the restaurant. A car slowly passed by, and the driver looked straight at me. He knew. Oh no, he knew. I couldn't help but let out a small whimper, anxiously awaiting his reaction, but his expression remained unchanged, his gaze shifting toward the exit road. As we continued walking, more people appeared. My face burned as we got closer, but no one seemed to pay much attention to me. When the automatic doors opened, a wall of noise engulfed us. The place was packed, and the line at the food counter stretched nearly the length of the restaurant. I stared at the floor as we waited, avoiding eye contact and flinching at every laugh. I felt people walking past me, and at one point, a couple of older women stopped chatting and stared at my blouse before moving on, clearly surprised by the bra I was wearing. Why couldn't he have bought me normal bras? What teenage girl wears a long-line bra? Even under a petticoat and blouse, it was still quite noticeable. I glanced over my shoulder after they passed, only to find them standing a few feet away, sizing me up and whispering to each other. My heart dropped as I distinctly heard the word girdle rise above the general noise, and I quickly snapped my head forward, staring at the ground again. 10 long minutes later, we finally reached the counter. I could barely look the assistant in the eye as I ordered a Coke and a chicken burger. I had no appetite, but I knew I had to eat something, and he was barely able to take his eyes off me. It felt like an eternity before the food arrived, and as soon as it was on my tray, I picked it up and headed to a free table in a far corner, hoping to be as unseen as possible. Just as I was about to sit down, I felt a tap on my shoulder and was reminded yet again to be ladylike and remember what I practiced. I pulled the chair out, brushed my hand across my backside to smooth my skirt, and sat down with my knees together. Throughout the entire meal, I glared at him as he praised me endlessly, how proud he was, how jealous he was, how the girdle gave me slightly girlish hips that the tight skirt accentuated, how I might look better with breast forms in my bra to enhance my bust, and so on. Couldn't he ever just be quiet? Why couldn't he see the agony he was putting me through? After what felt like half an hour, though it was likely much longer, we left. I noticed the assistant who had served us pointing me out to a colleague, and they both started laughing. My face flushed again, and I rushed out of the main restaurant area toward the restrooms. I was about to reach for the door when I felt my bra strap being tugged. I whirled around in shock to find him standing there with a silly smirk, pointing me toward the ladies' room. Once inside a stall, finally out of sight, I held my petticoat and skirt up around my waist to keep them clean, feeling anger and embarrassment as I looked down at the girdle and stockings around my ankles. I thought about how many people would see me over the next 2 weeks and how many would realize I wasn't a girl. I imagined the hotel staff figuring it out, the awkwardness of seeing them repeatedly, having to walk past them, meet their gaze, smile at them, and even converse, all while knowing they recognized me as a boy in a dress. They would see the outlines of the heavy corsetry showing through my light summer dresses, even with a petticoat, and know I was just a little boy in, oh my God, can you believe it? A girdle, a bra, and a dress. The word would spread throughout the hotel in no time, but I would still have to maintain the act, pretending not to notice the laughter in their eyes, the smirks on their faces, the pointing and staring, the whispers and giggles. As I sat there, imagining the humiliation that awaited me day after day, I finally broke down and cried, just cried and cried. I can't help but admire how much Daniel has progressed over the past few months. He now passes in public without any trouble at all. Looking back on his first outing last summer, I realize I may have rushed things a bit. I was simply too eager to see him give it a try, and sending him out just a few days after buying his first dresses and skirts, without considering crucial elements like hair and makeup, was likely a mistake. He wasn't as convincing as I had hoped and attracted more attention than I would have liked. I doubt anyone genuinely thought he was a boy, but he definitely looked peculiar enough to warrant a few double takes. The fact that, in certain lighting, the outline of his foundations showed through the lightweight dresses didn't help either. That would have drawn attention even if he had been a girl. He recognized this too, and by the end of the first week, he was begging not to have to go out in a summer dress. Even though the weather was warm, I took pity on him, and we went shopping for new clothes. He seemed surprised when I led him to the ladies' department at the store. Where else did he think we would go? After explaining to the assistant what we were looking for, I left him in her capable hands to be measured. We picked out a few items for the rest of the week, and I sent him to the changing rooms to make sure everything fit. When I was younger, I always felt a thrill going to the lingerie section, choosing a girdle or corselet, and then asking to use the changing rooms. The expressions on shop assistants' faces when they realized I was buying corsetry for myself were priceless, as were their awkward attempts to maintain eye contact and not look me up and down when I returned to the register to pay. Remembering this, I waited just long enough for Daniel to strip down to his girdle and bra before asking the assistant to check if everything was okay. It had been a tough week for him, and I figured he could use a boost. I casually made my way to a spot where I could catch a glimpse into the changing room when the curtain was pulled back. The assistant was so taken aback by the nature of his underwear that it took her a moment to regain her composure and close the curtain behind her. This gave me a clear view of Daniel's face as he stood there in his foundations, one of his new skirts pulled halfway up. God, I wish I had a camera. Since then, we've practiced with makeup, spending quite a bit in the process. However, thanks to tips from various women's magazines, he can now do a decent job of beautifying himself. He has a natural talent for it, his looks are always subtle and never garish or over the top. I've also purchased a couple of wigs, which he initially found a bit challenging to adjust to. Both wigs are close to Daniel's natural dark brown, or should I say brunette, color, shoulder length, with one styled in a ponytail. Over the past 3 months, I've insisted that after school, he immediately dress fully in panties, girdle, stockings, bra, petticoat, skirt, top, and shoes, do his makeup, put on a wig, and then spend the rest of the evening as a girl. This was to help him fully adapt and become completely convincing. I'm proud to say he is now almost unrecognizable from the awkward, self-conscious, androgynous kid who looked so uncomfortable last summer. These past 2 weekends, I've taken him on day trips to give him another chance to pass in public. I conceded that it was silly to make him leave the house in a skirt where locals might see him. That was another misjudgment on my part during the summer. The new routine is for him to leave the house in an old pair of jeans and a sweatshirt. Once we're far enough away, I pull into a lay-by where he changes in the back seat into his girl's clothes and wig. After that, he gets back in front, does his makeup in the mirror, and we continue on our way. I couldn't take my eyes off him yesterday while we started our Christmas shopping. He was wearing one of my favorites, a fitted black skirt with a mid-thigh hemline that really accentuates his feminine shape. I walked a few steps behind him to admire how much older he looked than his 14 years. With the distinct curve of his hips, the small but noticeable bust, enhanced slightly with some new breast forms, those big brown eyes, and his beautiful long dark hair, I would challenge anyone to think they were looking at anything other than one of the prettiest young girls they had ever seen. The only attention he attracts now comes from young, and some not so young, men, far removed from the curious stares he received just a few weeks ago. If only I had a physique like his. I really hope he understands how lucky he is. I now plan to ensure he dresses as often as possible. Having come this far with such success after a shaky start, it would be incredibly unfair not to give him every opportunity to become Davina. It's been nearly a year and a half since I made him wear his first panty girdle, and now it has become such a part of his life that it's unthinkable for him to be without one. Perhaps in a few more years, being fully dressed as a girl will feel so natural that when he's old enough to move into his own place, far from anyone who knows him, he might want to start anew and be Davina full-time. I know it's a bit early to think about such things, but I feel it's my duty to give him the best possible start, just in case. The bell rang, signaling the end of visiting hours. As I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt, he smiled at me and told me how I was becoming more beautiful with each passing year. I smiled back and assured him I'd be back to see him tomorrow. Walking down the ward, I knew he was watching me the entire way, and I sighed with relief as I turned left and headed down the stairs, finally out of his line of sight. More beautiful with every passing year. I certainly hoped so. I had spent nearly every evening and weekend of the last 3 years dressed and made up as a girl. I felt I had enough practice. A few people glanced at me as I exited the building, but I barely noticed them. Years ago, my heart would have raced every time someone made eye contact. Now, at the ripe age of 17, I was confident that I could pass as a girl. I wished I had bulked up like some of the other guys at school. If I had ended up looking like a weightlifter in a dress, this whole situation might have come to an end ages ago. But no such luck. At 5'10" with a slim physique, I was both fortunate and cursed able to pass as a woman, but stuck with a father determined to maximize that talent. It was still a warm evening, so I left my jacket off while waiting for the train. This resulted in a few odd glances, particularly from women who saw the outline of my long-line bra through my blouse, but that no longer bothered me. They just assumed I was a teenage girl with an unusual taste in underwear, not a teenage boy pervert, so it was manageable. On the journey to the hospital, I had changed clothes and applied my makeup in the restroom between the coaches, slipping into the other coach afterwards so no one would notice. I intended to make the same girly-to-boy transformation on the way back, but I got lost in daydreams and only realized I was still in a blouse and skirt as the train pulled into the station. My immediate thought was to head to the station restrooms to change before going home, but that was impossible. The crowd in the concourse made it nearly impossible to enter the men's restroom dressed as a girl or exit the ladies' room as a boy. My heart began to race as I slung the bag containing my jeans and sweatshirt over my shoulder and walked out the main door. For the first time since we left to spend our first holiday as father and daughter, I was outside in my hometown dressed in girls' clothes. Surprisingly, I wasn't as nervous as I had expected to be. I felt confident in my ability to pass as female. I did, however, put on my jacket and zipped it just enough to hide my bra. Less attention was better.